Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. We've been here in Tower. We actually bought the Marttila buildings in 2014. Myself, I'm Vicki Carlson, and my husband, Charlie Carlson, who is still at work today. So we had learned quite a bit about the Marttila family and all kinds of great stories as people come in. I often relate quite well to it. I grew up in a soda fountain family in Detroit, Michigan, and ran that business till I was 30 years old, and it's still there today. So when people come in and talk about being at that counter and having coffee and the green rivers, I can relate. So we wanted to put this together when we found out that Nancy and the organization for the Historical Society were going to be doing history talks. I said, I think there's a lot of people that have a lot to say about Marttila drug. So I'd like to introduce now Dave Anderson, who is related, of course, to the Marttilas, and our favorite weatherman, as we say, with the Range accent on CBS 3.
Thank you, Vicki. Thank you so much.
Oh, yeah, all this.
Good day, sir. Keep in touch. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. Thank you for coming here. Like Vicki said, my name is Dave Anderson, and I'm the lead meteorologist on CBS 3 TV. Hopefully some of you watch me do that. And if, yay. Well, here's the promotion part. If you don't, you have to start Monday. 5, 6, and 10 p.m., please. We'd love to have you tune in and check things out. All right, small market TV like at Channel 3 doesn't pay very well. I see the Dr. Pepper distributor in Duluth is offering $2.50 an hour more than what I get. But then again, getting a Class A commercial driver's license is probably harder than getting a meteorology degree. So they're probably worth it. Bottom line is you don't make much money in this job, but that means then you have to do some side jobs. One of my side jobs is teaching meteorology at Lake Superior College in the aviation department. Last semester, one of my students was a young fella from Tower here named Jacob McCabe. Maybe he serves you or deals to you at the casino. That's where he works. Well, I mention him because he lives in one of the old Marttila buildings right now, probably where my grandparents spent some time living back right after World War II. So we're here to talk about the Marttilas, aren't we? Well, my mother, she's a Danish Anderson from Babbitt. My father is a Swedish-Finnish Anderson from Tower. They met at Ely Junior College thanks to alphabetical order. They were always in line together and romance blossomed from that. So my father, Terry Anderson, is Tower class of 1961. His father is Pella Anderson, used to live a block that way. And Pella was a rebellious Swede back in 1940. He married a Finnish woman. That didn't fly too well back in those days, didn't it? Swedish Lutherans and Finnish Lutherans were not the same thing. And of course, that makes my grandfather, or grandmother then, Ellen Marttila, which ties me into the history of the Marttila Empire that started with Constantine, known as Const Marttila. Here on this picture, which comes from during the World War II era, you will see Const. He's holding my father. My father was born in November 1943. He was named Terry Allen by my grandmother after General Terry Allen, who was big in the news then, was one of the few successful American generals in 1943, leading campaigns in North Africa. So that's why my father got that name. And there's Const holding him. And that little girl in front, we figure, is one of Betty Marttila Colness's daughters. That's probably Patty there. And you can tell this is World War II because there's the blue star in the window because Walter was overseas serving in the Army Air Force, dropping bombs on Hitler. Although when this series of pictures was taken, he must have been home on leave because it's a whole series of Const with the kids and Const with his grandkids and Walter in his uniform. A very wonderful piece of our family history. And that house still stands here in Tower, of course. It's not where it originally was. It was moved a few blocks in the mid-60s, but we'll get to that as we go through this presentation. And I hope you guys don't get sore butt syndrome because I have about 46 of these slides And if I take a minute on each one, we're here about 45 minutes. All right. So a little bit of rundown on Konst Marttila, the patriarch of this clan. We figure he was born in Finland around 1871. You know, my Tower-Soudan family is not that touchy-feely. We're not one of those having reunions every year type families and hugging and kissing and stuff. We kind of keep our distance. We could have beaten COVID, I suppose, if it had come around in 1945. We probably did pretty good surviving the 1918 flu, you know, because we're pretty good at social distancing. So nobody knows any of this stuff for sure. I spent months researching these things, asking like James Marttila questions, my Aunt Jill Anderson Phillips, who lives in Eveleth, questions, and relying on the stories my grandmother told me back in the day. So hopefully by hook or by crook, we have a semi-cohesive history of the Marttilas, which again starts with Konst. We think he was born in Finland around 1871. If you look him up online, they try to say he was born in 1891, and that would have made him 12 years old when he started the drugstore, or the confectionery. So other sources say 1871. Emigrated from Finland and immigrated to the United States around the year 1890. Probably landed at Ellis Island, of course, and ended up in the upper Midwest, Marquette, Michigan first. But he was a hobo riding the rails, we're told by family lore, and even lost a toe getting too close of a call with one of those trains. Lived in Marquette, Michigan for a while. We think he was a miner, and that's why he was attracted to move to the Vermilion Range when that opened up around the early 1890s. Or actually, we're thinking early 1890s to the late 1890s. Why do we think perhaps late 1890s? Well, because my Aunt Jill does have Konst's naturalization papers here, signed off in Tower in 1897. One of the witnesses on there saying Konst was an upstanding Finlander. There are such a thing, or there is such a thing. And as a part Finn, I can call us Finlanders. But if outsiders do that, that's not good, is it? No. We can tease ourselves, but others better shut the heck up. All right. Charles Johnson. That name sounds familiar, doesn't it? Could it have been this Charles Johnson? That famous sign on the building up the street there with the Omar coffee? That's been there my entire life. Probably all of your lives as well. Charles Johnson used to run a store in town. I wonder if the storekeepers back around 1900 stuck together and vouched for each other. No way to prove that. There's probably a couple dozen Charles Johnsons perhaps in Tower back then, but we'll take a shot. Konst opens his first store, family lore says, in 1903. But by looking at the Minnesota Historical Society, they've got the Tower newspaper online there from about 1900 to 1923. Because papers published prior to 1923 are public domain. Anybody can steal them. So the Historical Society has them all online, and they're fun to peruse. Tower's history is amazing. This is a heck of a town. But I can't find any evidence of his store till about 1908, 1910. He didn't run any ads in 1903. So we have to run on family lore to say the 1903 year. This ad here, I think, is from 1908. Konst Marttila's store. And when he first opened that store, rather than a confectionery, if you look at everything he's offering for Christmas here, games, books, sleighs, dolls, tool chests, drums, horns, etc. He had a general store going on before he switched over to a confectionery. And from what family lore tells me, you guys all know that, well, the stores now are on that side of Main Street. I was told by my grandmother the first store was on this side of Main Street, and he didn't move probably until 1911. All right, let's move on and take a look at this picture of the Marttila family. This picture is from around 1930. If we start from the right or left and go to the right, or actually, yeah, it would be your left to your right. We've got Martha, then Walter, Konst, his wife Fanny, and then Betty, and my grandmother Ellen. We think Konst and Fanny got married somewhere between 1904 and 1911. The rationale on that is Fanny should have been about 16 in 1904. You know how they got married young back then. And since Martha and her twin sister, my grandmother, were born in 1912, you know, societal norms wouldn't have put up with any monkey business. So 1911 is the upper end of that. So bottom line is, Const marries the love of his life during that time period, and they raise quite a brood of children. This picture shows 4, but there are more, which we'll talk about. Well, the Marttila store was really quite popular early on. Here's an ad from 1910. Talk about fads. Look at that. Hot soda and soft drinks. Yes, hot soda was a kick. I looked that up online. There was a craze in the 19-teens where people liked their soda pop warm, heated up, almost like coffee, to each their own. I'm surprised the kids today haven't started that back up again, because they're always coming up with trends that just stump us old timers, don't they? And by 1910, you can see that the gist of the store has shifted over towards candy and sweets and soda, and of course cigars and things like that, which must have driven Fanny Marttila crazy, because as my grandmother told me, she was a very staunch teetotaling Finnish woman. No smoking, no card playing, no dancing, no drinking. My grandmother was hoping to live to be 100. She didn't quite get there, but she got close. She had plans on having a drink at the age of 100. And even though her mother had died decades before, like 70 years before she told me these things, she was still worried about what her mother would think if she danced or played cards or had a drink. So those Finnish mothers, their legacy lingers from beyond. Ooh, thou shalt not. Now, in 1911, that's when we figure Kant's store went from this side of the street to the place where it is now. And you can see, of course, the ad says, new store, new goods. Still got cigars and things like that. But now they're selling ice cream, Duluth ice cream. That is a big deal, because we all know that Duluth ice cream is also known as Bridgman's. Bridgman's used to be good stuff. Still is for the random scattered stores that are still around. I think Floodwoods is closed, but there's still that one going on in Duluth over by the Aldi's. And it's really good stuff. And of course, we have to show a picture of what the Marttila building looks like now, because we have to thank Charlie and Vicky and Willard for discovering during resighting the other year that velvet ice cream sign. That was made by Bridgman's in Duluth. And also hats off to the Carlson family then for restoring and displaying that piece of Tower-Soudan history. And of course, my family's history. Now, Bridgman's ice cream is good, of course, but you guys all had Walt and Martha's ice cream, didn't you? And that was a pretty good family gathering when Walt and Martha came and brought the ice cream. Those were good birthdays. They didn't do it all the time, but most of the time, and enough time to give you a craving. That tradition started in the 40s. This is an ad. This is the one that the Historical Society has on their website right now. Now, fresh homemade ice cream, something new, something better. And they kept making that into the late 80s, even I think into the early 90s before Walt and Martha retired and sold the operation to Jean Ann. Now, my second cousin, James Marttila, Walter's son, of course, when he was giving me information on this presentation, was telling me about the ice cream and how it just got harder and harder and more expensive to make as time went on. By the time we got into the 1980s, into the early 90s, James was the guy who would go to Minneapolis, he told me, to get supplies for Walt and Martha, who, of course, Walt and Martha would stay up late at night making that ice cream. But James had to go to the Twin Cities to buy these increasingly difficult and expensive ingredients and bring them up to Tower. And James told me that the distributors were all as old, if not older, than Walt and Martha. You know, they would have been in their early 80s by the time they gave up the ice cream business. James told me that some of the suppliers for the flavorings and things like that, they were so old they were in wheelchairs. But they kept on doing it for people like Walt and Martha. You know, talk about a work ethic. Look at Walt and Martha. They worked well into their 80s before they finally retired. And I can remember once when they were in their 80s and there was something going on family-wise, and they, oh no, we can't come to that. We've got to go to the nursing home and help the old people. You know, they worked for themselves, they worked for their families, they worked for the community. They just worked. That's the way they rolled. All right, let's go to the next big event in Const's family history. It's 1912. And Martha and my grandmother Ellen are born in November. And there's a picture of the twin babies. 1912, yeah, the same year as the Titanic. That's when Martha and Ellen came about. Then Const and Fanny in 1916, Betty was born. Pardon me if I hack a little bit here, guys. I had COVID about 6 weeks ago, and it only felt like a head cold for a couple of days. But one thing it did do to me is kind of knock my lung capacity down. And of course, it only kicks up when I'm giving presentations over the weather. Then I start. Maybe you've noticed that. I always try to play it off as I'm so excited about this forecast, I'm hyperventilating. And maybe that covers it for a lot of people. So anyway, in 1916, Betty was born. And of course, later on, she married Don Colness here in Tower. So Betty Marttila Colness, born 1916. In this picture, you can see in the back row my grandmother Ellen, twin sister Martha. In the front row is Walter, who's born a little bit later on. And then there's Betty on the end. Walter, everybody knows Uncle Walt, born in 1918. This is a picture of him prior to World War II cutting the family's firewood up there on the lot. So even if you're a little Finnish guy who's only 5'3", that doesn't keep you from wielding an axe and getting that wood cut. You know, size is no obstacle to a Tower-Soudan Finn with sisu, I'll tell you what. All right. Now, in 1920 and 1923, two more children, Helen and Billy, were born. This picture, I think, shows there's Betty and my grandmother, Fanny, Const, Martha. That's probably Walter, the boy, standing, and sitting on Fanny's lap is probably Helen. I don't know if any pictures of Billy exist because they were killed in a boat accident on Lake Vermilion in 1926. Here's the Tower News article clipping that my grandmother saved all her life. And I don't think she ever got over that. So it's hard for me to talk about as well. But some rich guy from Chicago with his speedboat ran over one of the families in a smaller boat, had all the kids out. Two were killed. I believe, since Fanny was a Harma, I think it was a Harma that was the skipper of the Marttila boat, and he worked really hard to save a lot of lives, but still two were lost. That sets up a thing about my grandmother that she was worried she was going to die young. And if you knew my grandmother Ellen, she did not die young. So, two of her siblings were killed in the year 1926. Keep that in mind as we work through time goes on here. This is a family treasure. This is a picture of the inside of the confectionery from, it's either 1924 or 1927. My Aunt Jill in Evelyn has the original for this. This is just a scanned copy, which blurs things a little bit. But when I had the original in a magnifying glass, I could read the dates on the calendars in the back. So it's either July 24 or July 27. I'm leaning towards July 24 because that would make my Aunt Martha and my grandmother Ellen about 12. Because this picture shows Const there at the soda fountain, and those two taller girls in the back are Ellen and Martha. And nobody's been able to figure out who the little person is. Maybe that's the elusive Billy. We don't know for sure. But we treasure this picture because it shows the confectionery in action. My second cousin James Marttila, Walter's son, still has that Hires root beer mixing container. And the cash register in the back. Vicki, do you guys have that? Or Jean-Ann, did you get that? Oh, Ann's got it. Okay, Walter's daughter. All right. And you can't see him too good on this projection screen, but you know, the place was filled with these really intricate wire tables and wire chairs. And my father has one of the tables and two of the chairs. So that's our treasure. And a treasure that I've got, my grandmother gave me in the 70s. And my mother told me I better treasure it because my grandmother doesn't give things away too easily. I've got an old brass cigar humidor from the shelves there where Const would sell cigars. So it was a family operated business, Const in charge. Fanny, I'm told, never worked in the business because she could only speak Finnish. And I guess Const had a hard time with English himself, but he could say enough to get business done. The kids worked in the store as well. And so my grandmother has told many stories over the years about what it was like to work in that store. And you can read many of them in that Tower-Soudan history book that the Timberjay published a number of years ago, Lake Vermilion Memories, I think it's called. If you have a copy of it, enjoy it. If you need to find one, look for it. My grandma tells a lot of tales about what it was like in the store. So keeping in mind that Fanny did not like things like gambling and dancing and smoking and drinking. She was a member of the Temperance Society over there in Sudan. Const had a slot machine on the wall. There was some gambling. We don't know what happened to that, but it says in the book that, during economic downturns like the Great Depression or recessions every now and then, that thing kept the family going with people trying their luck. So sometimes you got to do what you got to do. And my grandmother would tell me that she and Martha really loved blackjack gum. And their father was pretty easygoing. When they were working, they were allowed to have a little candy, but they were told to leave the expensive chocolates alone. My grandmother was not so kind as a youngster, she told me. When he wasn't looking, she'd take the expensive chocolates. Especially when it was time to go after work and go over to the Rex and watch a movie, a silent movie, or a Clara Bow movie. I'm told that was my grandmother's favorite star, Clara Bow, the it girl back in the day. She'd fill her pockets with the expensive chocolates. And she felt guilty about that into her 90s. So I guess eventually she quit doing that. All right, let's move on now. Talk about Martha. This is a picture of Martha with, I believe, my uncle Daryl, who was, I think, Tower-Soudan class of 64, in case any of you knew him. He passed on in the last couple of years. I find this picture fascinating, and I show it because those seaplanes in the background were run by the Burgesses. So they weren't just selling Chevrolets, they were also taking you for airplane rides. They, the Pilas are part of my family. So, Sonny Pila, they always called him Gold Find because he was as clever and as scheming as the gold finds down in Duluth, running Arrowhead Dodge and places like that. I guess the Burgesses were just as sharp. And speaking of Arrowhead Dodge, I do still have my grandfather's old yellow 68 Dodge Monaco that came from Arrowhead Dodge. Just in case you guys remember my grandfather driving that. He drove it till about 1984, gave it to me, and bought himself a K car. Oh well, those K cars are probably long since recycled into refrigerators, while the 68 Dodge is still pretty good condition. Little Bondo here and there, but not too bad. So anyway, Martha and Ellen, since they're twins, they graduated from Tower High School, and Constance saved enough money to send them both to college to learn to be teachers. Martha graduates from the University of Minnesota, and she goes on to have a long career teaching at the reservation school out there. And when that closed, she finished her career with the Tower Schools from 1935 to 1973. And she told me before she passed on, she loved all of her students. Any of you have Martha for school? All right. Any from the reservation school here? Everyone is from the Tower School? Well, she loved you guys too, but she said she especially loved the kids from the reservation school. And when they'd come to the drugstore to chat, she'd have a really good time. All right, so that was Martha's career. And then on top of that, of course, she worked in the confectionery and then the drugstore. So again, workaholic, always working, always moving, always going. Let's see. My grandmother, Ellen, of course, graduates from the University of Minnesota, too. Her teaching career is much shorter, 1935 to 40. First year, she taught at the Lincoln School in Ely, where my father eventually became principal, which was torn down in 1980. That was a neat old building. I still miss it today. Teachers with more tenure in the Ely district didn't like that. You couldn't start at the Cadillac School. So in 1936, she was sent to the Winton School to teach, which of course is also long since gone. And here is then my grandmother Ellen with her class at the Winton School. And I think it's that little blonde girl on the end I have to tell the next story about. I sold something on eBay a number of years ago, and the woman who bought it from me then sends me a message. Oh, I see you're in Duluth, Minnesota. Did you know my mother's from Winton, Minnesota? And it didn't take long to put two and two together that my grandmother was her mother's teacher. And so that little blonde girl was my grandmother's pet, her favorite student in that class. And after my grandmother moved into the nursing home in Virginia, those two became pen pals and were able to catch up for a couple of years. Thanks to the miracle of eBay. One never knows where these connections are going to come up. All right, 1926 was the first tragedy for the Marttila family when those two children were killed in the boating accident. In 1936, Fanny passes away at the age of 48. The article here says she had a stroke after finding out that one of her family members was sick, and it took about a week for her to pass away from that. So, 1926, 1936, my grandmother starts seeing a trend. Every 10 years, somebody dies. That worries her. But let's move on to something happier. Also around 1936, Betty marries Don Colness. Any of you guys know Don? Ever work with him, say, when he was a linotype operator at the Tower News? And I'm told he went on to be linotype operator at the Ely Miner for a number of years. And if you want to see a linotype machine, go to the Tower News place because it's still in there. Those monster machines would melt the lead for you and lay the type, do the paper, let it cool down, break up the type, remelt it, do it for the next edition. Big monster machine, difficult to run. I've got an old dictionary from the 50s, or an encyclopedia from the 50s, which has a multi-page article on how to work a linotype. It was like clutches and foot pedals and levers, like running a locomotive out there. So Don really had some skills, and it's a big monster of a machine. When I talked to Tony Sikora for the record Cold in 1996 at the Tower News office, he pointed the machine out to me and said I could have it if I could get it out. And I'm told it's still in there, so nobody got it out. I think they told me they have to cut the wall out to get that thing out of there. So it may be a permanent tribute to the Tower News for the rest of our existence. All right, let's move on then to time keeps going on. Const has to keep working. And here's a nice picture of Const. This comes from Jim Marttila. Const in front of the confectionery store. And Vicky tells me they still have at least one of those windows down in the basement of the building. And as she told me earlier today, that's another thing that's never coming out again because the stairs have been rearranged since it was put down there, and so it's not coming out. You might have to open a Marttila museum down there in the basement, Vicky. On that note, Jean Ann is here, and she has some Marttila drug mementos and memories that she'll put out on the table and we can look at when my spiel is done. That's still a good offer, Jean Ann? All right. So we got tangible things to look at rather than these crazy images here. All right. Of course, you know, we're getting older, yes, most of us in this room, but we're not as old as this generation, the greatest generation, the World War II generation. This is a picture sent to me by James Marttila showing a bunch of guys hanging outside of Const's. And I can't really tell if this is pre-World War II or post-World War II. It's probably somewhere in the vein of 1941 to 1946. And Bunker Hill, you guys all remember him. Well, that's one of the best nicknames in history. Aren't we Tower-Soudan, Ely, Vermilion Range folks great at giving good nicknames that stick for everybody's life? So Bunker Hill identified some of the people here on this screen, and we can see, he says, let's see, there's Stan Hill himself is there with Roy Carlson, Don Erickson, Howard Bristol, Jerry Stefanich, I know Jerry or knew Jerry, Byron Jackson, Del Burgess. Del was one of my dad's good friends and my grandfather's good friends. Oh, Del once told me a good story about the brewery. My grandfather, Pella Anderson, had a deer rifle, which was hard to come by in the 30s, but he wanted a horse. And a traveling horse trader would come to the brewery once a year. Grandpa traded his deer rifle for a horse. That's a big sacrifice for a Tower-Soudan man in the 30s. You know, he used that to provide food for the family, but he used that horse to haul river water from East Two Rivers here to the hotels at 50 cents a barrel. And with the inflation rate, that was about $10 a barrel. So if you did a couple of those a day, you weren't doing too bad. You fed that to your families. And so that's my Del Burgess story. It must have been 4th of July, 1996 or so when Del told me that story, standing over there by Desnoy's Standard Motor Garage. Because, of course, that's where my family always went to watch the 4th of July parade. And that leads me to another story, guys. You all familiar with the legend of sports from Channel 3, Marsh Nelson? He was a big deal even when I was a little kid. So it's 4th of July in the 70s. And we're, of course, standing by Dave Desnoy's garage there. And coming across the street from Arrowhead Dodge, the Pila place, is Marsh Nelson, the TV star. Wow. He walks up to my grandparents and addresses them by name. Hi, Ellen. Hi, Pella. Huh? How does the TV star know my grandparents? Yeah. Turns out he grew up right behind their place over there on North 2nd Street. So there we go. Channel 3 guys can come from Tower-Soudan. I guess I'm one of them too. Then there's another one. I forget his name. I think he was a general manager of a station down in Mankato or something. The other year when I was up for what they call a Silver Circle Emmy Award, it's pretty much the attendance award. Oh, you showed up for work for 25 years. Maybe you'll get one of these awards. I didn't get one. He got one. But some of the sting was taken out of that loss because he has Tower roots, it said in the Tower News. I'll have to look up who that guy even was. I don't think I've ever met him, but Tower is Tower. And these Tower guys indeed enjoying the atmosphere and the ambiance at Const's for as long as they probably could, indeed. And you guys know the story. You remember all the old timers sitting there drinking the nickel coffee and hogging up the booths so no other customers could come in and get anything. But that's the way the place rolled. And Walt and Martha and all the employees, all the beloved employees that helping out, you put up with it. You grinned and you bared it and you got through the day. We're at the year 1940. My grandmother was teaching in the Ely School District at Winton, enjoying her job. She took the train from Tower every day and went to Ely there to teach and Winton and then came back again. The train. I missed that. My grandfather has a picture of the last train to Tower from around sometime in the 70s. And then I remember once the Bud car came up from Duluth with some ritzy people, and it was at the depot there. And that was a big deal to come over and see that. I have a feeling it's the same Bud cars they now use on the tourist train down there in Duluth. Anyway, here's my grandmother, Ellen, and my grandfather, Gilbert Pella Anderson. They married in 1940 with Gerald Peterson as best man, and I think Martha as maid of honor. And Grandma had to quit working, of course, because it was against the law for a teacher to be married back then, wasn't it? And that was Minnesota state law till the early 70s. I'm told by my father, who was a principal in the Ely district, it was one of the Ely women teachers who fought that law and got it rescinded. So, Grandma marries Pella, and she quits teaching, and of course, keeps working at her father's store. Now, around 1940 as well, Walter graduates from the University of Minnesota. It's like Const had a thing for the U of M, I guess. Maybe that was the only university in Minnesota at the time. You know, UMD was just a teacher school then, but I guess that wasn't good enough for Grandma and Martha. Walter goes down, gets a degree in forestry. He's a pharmacist, huh? He started off with a degree in forestry, and then he joins the Army. Family lore doesn't know for sure if he was drafted when FDR started the draft in 1940, or like a lot of other guys, he just, jumped the gun and picked his service and got in where he wanted to. That was the same story with Arleigh Burke, the Pearl Harbor survivor from White Lakes. Maybe some of you knew him. One of his sons, I believe, is Pastor Burke here in Tower-Soudan. So anyway, he knew war was coming. He joined the Navy before he ended up being a ground pounder. Well, Walter became a ground pounder. He joined the infantry. But then World War II begins, and he gets a commission, Lieutenant Marttila, B-17 Navigator. His nickname was Shorty. I found that out because many years ago, Walter told me his squadron number and his bomb group. And it turns out his memory was a little off. It took some research. He was off a couple of numbers on each unit. But by talking to World War II historians for the Air Force, they were able to ascertain which units he actually was in. And indeed, he was listed on the flight rosters as Lieutenant Shorty Marttila. And of course, in that group there, you can see that he is the short officer in the back. And then that's the entire crew of the B-17 there, the gunners. Walter was the navigator, the bombardier, the co-pilots, the radio operator. The whole crew is there. The name of this B-17 is Snafu. And one thing that we couldn't figure out while researching Walter's plane here is if this was his full-time plane that he did 25 missions on, or if this was one of the preliminary planes that he had to fly on while training overseas. You know, we always hear in those movies you had to do 25 bombing missions before you could be shipped home. Well, that wasn't the whole story. Walter, for example, and many others did upwards of a half dozen fill-in missions as a replacement. Somebody loses a crewman, you're filling in on that mission with these guys. Walter did 6 of those missions before getting his own plane and then fulfilling the 25. So we weren't able to tell if Snafu here was his real plane or one of the fill-in ones. And, you know, unfortunately, this computer is not playing the backgrounds that I put into this presentation. Yeah, that's the little luck of the draw. Doggone it. I had these really pretty colored backgrounds on many of the graphics, and this one was a full-page image of 2 B-17s training in Tennessee, I believe. They come from my grandfather's photo collection. My grandfather, Pella Anderson, if you knew him, he loved photography. From box cameras up to when he died, he had a 35 millimeter camera. He always, if you asked that guy to pose for a picture, he dropped everything and put on a smile, you know. As a guy who served as a TV photographer for a few years, I've run into half the people are like that. Whoa, yeah, get my picture, tell my story. The other half run and they flee. And like Vicky said, they use a common line. Whoa, I'm in the witness protection plan. I don't know how many times I've heard that. I think I heard that from you there today. So it was used once again today. It was, oh, and then Vicky said she uses that line as well. So anyway, this was a nice picture of 2 B-17s. It was a postcard that was in my grandfather's photo album. That's where a lot of these pictures come from. He had a big section on Walter's plane and Walter's training, all the stuff Walter must have sent to him, even though my grandfather was taking care of business himself in the Pacific, because you saw in that previous image, he was wearing a sailor outfit, the winter jumper. Yeah, he was a Navy Seabee during the war on the other side of the world from Walter, but saved all the pictures Walter sent. Walter sent a lot of pictures of his crew. You know, there was that group shot there with the whole crew. Then there's a subset with just the officers, a subset with the enlisted men, and then each crewman with his position, whether tail gunner, ball gunner, things like that. Walter well documented things, at least photographically. Again, his memory by his old age was a little bit slipping. So by checking in with historians, Walter served with the 384th Bomb Group, the 546th Squadron, flew 31 missions out of Grafton Underwood RAF Air Base in England. Walter told me most of those missions weren't too bad, but he says they did lose one guy on one mission, and that tore Walter up to tell that story about the one crewman who was hit by, I think, fighter fire. They hit Berlin many times, so we got that coming up right next here. Here's a list of, or at least some of Walt's missions, because while perusing for this just this past week, I hit on a site that actually had a list of Walter's missions, all 31 of them. And only 31. Walter had told me 32, but the mist of time must have put another one onto his total. It was 31. They hit Berlin several times. I read about the first one. I looked at the date, so I typed in on Google, bomb raid on Berlin, May 7th, 1944. And it gave a pretty good accounting of all the different groups and planes and squadrons that targeted that mission and who got hit the worst. Walter must have been in one of the safer groups. You know, they had low, medium, and high. He must have been medium because they're the best protected. He didn't have any trouble on that mission. That one flew from England across Holland into northern Germany and over towards Berlin. But Walter told me when he was talking about his service days that most of those Berlin missions, they would hit the North Sea, cut across Denmark into the Baltic, and then down to Berlin, reducing the amount of anti-aircraft cannons that could be firing up at him. And that must have helped with his longevity because, of course, he lived to be a fairly old man. Thank goodness for that. Let's see, some of those missions they did, along with hitting Berlin, they supported the D-Day landings by bombing French targets during the week of Operation Overlord. 31 missions. How long did Walter serve overseas? Really, technically not that long. Late April through July 1944. That's how long it took to do those 31 missions. It averaged about one every 2 days. Some of those missions, as I looked at his list, they would go for several days in a row, you almost like a work week. Well, today you're hitting this factory in Germany, then get the weekend off. Must have been nerve-wracking worrying about all of that. The thing I found online also listed the medals that Walter had earned in his service. So he earned the Air Medal with 3 oak leaf clusters. If I can ascertain what the things mean on that list I looked at, they gave an Air Medal every 6 missions. So there's the first one, the Air Medal, and then 18 more missions got 3 oak leaf clusters. And then it must have been perhaps by the 30th mission, then he earned the Distinguished Flying Cross. Now, meanwhile, back in Tower, my grandmother Ellen is filling in at the store working while Walt is gone. And here's a nice picture then of Ellen standing at the front door. How they displayed the Life magazines back then. They put them in the window. And of course, we all know the old story of nobody in Tower ever had to buy a Life magazine because Const and Walter would let you read it for free like it was a library. And every time I go to Vicky's place and I see an old Life magazine for sale for a reasonable price, $5 or under, I have to buy it because then I like to think it came from this store. Somebody came here and gave a dime to my great-grandfather or my great-uncle and walked home with this magazine, and now I've got it. Ha, ha, ha. It's like my story at Channel 3. I started at Channel 3 in 1986 as the janitor when I was in college. So I wanted to see if I wanted to be a broadcaster by working behind the scenes. And then by the time I graduated from UMD and I applied to step up from janitor to cameraman, and they said no. So I went to Channel 6 and applied for one of those cameraman jobs and got it. So for 3 years, I would be cameraman at Channel 6, and at 10:30 when the news ended, go to Channel 3 and clean the building. Always holding a grudge against Channel 3 for that. So my vengeance comes in 2005 when Channel 3 goes bankrupt. Channel 6's owners buy it. Now I'm the big deal at Channel 3 and everyone else got fired. And stop to think about it. Everybody from the 1986 era is gone. I'm the only one left. Vengeance is sweet for a Finn who has patience. All right. So my grandmother helps to fill in at the store during the war years. And now this next picture, this is going back to that series when I think Walt either came home on leave or came back from service. Here he is, we think, home on leave in 1944, maybe before he shipped over to England to do all those missions, or maybe this is when he came back after doing those 31 missions. So here's Walter, Lieutenant Walter Marttila, standing in front of the confectionery. And he looks very much at ease. And of course, I mentioned they took a big series of pictures. So also some of them are Walter with his father, Const. That's a nice picture of what the store looked like back in the day. Now, Const passes away in 1946. There we go, 26, 36, 46. My grandmother Ellen now thinks she's not going to live past 1956. But those of you who knew her, did any of you have her for a Sunday school teacher at the Lutheran Church? There we go. Dick did. Excellent. Oh, there's 2 of you at least. Well, we know that in 1956 she did not die, and in 1958 she had my Aunt Jill. So that kept her busy for many years afterwards, and I think she stopped worrying about passing on. Const passes away in 1946. Walter comes home with an English war bride named Verena. And they have a son named James. Here's a picture of Verena and James on the side of the confectionery building. James tells me there was a side door into the ice cream parlor in case you didn't want to walk past the Roughnecks playing the slot machine or looking at cigars. So there was a family entrance to the store as well. And of course, Verena came with her mother. So an English mother-in-law made the scene as well. I believe her name was Annie Oliver, but in the family we always just called her Mrs. Oliver. So there's a picture of Mrs. Oliver with James at the front of the store. And is that the window you still have, Vicki? Does it still have that yellow candy sundries thing on the top?
No, it just says Marttila.
Okay. That must have been added during the war years, because when we looked at that picture of 1940 of Const in front of the store, it wasn't on there. And then in these pictures from the mid to late 40s, it is on there. So anyway, there's Mrs. Oliver and James. Well, after World War II, my grandfather, Pelle Anderson, comes back from occupying Japan, along with a new deer rifle. So he may have traded that deer rifle for a horse, and then had to buy a saddle on installment payments from Sears and Roebuck. There's a sad ending to that horse. I may as well tell you that story now too. One day the horse got antsy and took off on its own, dragging the sledge with it for the water, and it got tangled into a whole bunch of barbed wire from all the fences around here, and that's what finally slowed the horse down so they could catch it. So that showed you how rammy that horse was. Grandpa tells me eventually that horse fell down a well, probably somewhere here on the south side of town, and it had to be put down because they couldn't get it out. And odds are it's still in somebody's yard. You know, here in Tower-Soudan, who knows what's down below? Those antiquers that like to privy hunt, you know, there's probably a lot of treasure buried around this place. So anyway, that's Grandpa's horse. Grandpa comes back from the Pacific, Guam, Hawaii, occupation of Japan, with his new deer rifle, a Japanese Arisaka Type 99 7.7. He brought home 2 of them, gave one to a cousin, turned one into a deer rifle, used it in his tire hunting career, and then gave it to me, which I still use today hunting, although it was much more effective in Grandpa's hands. I can go out deer hunting with a broom and have the same results, you know, but it's still a nice family memento. And then I'm told when the cousin eventually passed away, his wife asked my grandpa, well, do you want that rifle back? And you know, these stoic Tower Scandinavians, no, I already have one. Why do I need a second one? He didn't take it back. Which now leads me to a story where last year, Charlie Carlson sells me an old beat up Arisaka he got. And I looked at the serial numbers and they're only about 10,000 apart from the one I have and the one. Could this have been the second one? Vague possibility. I'm not too sure. Anyway, the war ends, and now Grandma, my grandfather, and my father, Terry, have to live in the store in one of the apartments up above for a while. There's Pella, my grandfather, with a couple of quarts of probably Bridgman's milk or maybe Tower Dairy milk. And that's my father, Terry Anderson, there with him. They had to live there with Const for a little while because, of course, my grandfather built his own house on North 2nd Street there. So yeah, it's probably right across over that way from this window. House is still standing. I have fond memories of that beautiful home that he put together all by himself. Now, the Marttila family home, that used to be right behind the confectionery where the Lutheran church is now. Very interesting. People like my grandfather, you know, married someone who lived in the house on that lot, and when he passed on, was laid to rest in the church on that lot. Tower life doesn't move too far from one spot to another, does it, at times? You come and you go in the same location, it seems. Anyway, this house had to go. It's not there anymore, is it? The church is there. That church where my son was baptized by Pastor Larner back in the day, had to keep that in the family too. That house in 1966, James Marttila tells me, was sold to somebody else, and they jacked it up and put it on a trailer, and they hauled it down to the same block where my grandfather built that house, maybe 2 houses down. It was like my grandmother could not escape that house her entire life. It followed her down the block. And again, that shows the sisu and the stamina and the toughness of Tower-Soudan people. Why let a good house go to waste? Let's move it somewhere else. And that's a big job. I watched someone do that in my neighborhood in Duluth, and you know, it's not exactly easy getting something like that up on on blocks and then onto a trailer and then pushing up the power line so nobody gets electrocuted. It's a big deal, but they did it here in Tower. Now, if that was 1966, let's backtrack now to the mid-50s. Walter's home, got a degree in forestry, but works at his father's old confectionery store. He goes back to college. He goes back to the University of Minnesota, earns a pharmacy degree. And as James says in his memoirs, in 1955, Walt graduates from the University of Minnesota with a degree in pharmacy. And they graduate at the old Memorial Stadium on the U of M campus. Big open air graduation ceremony. And James is there to proudly watch his father and probably get inspired by his father. And you guys probably know why, but in case you don't, that comes up here in the presentation as time goes on as well. Now, Walter's got a pharmacy degree and an old building. You know, if that building was there even before 1903, I don't think Hans built it special for opening his store brand new. That might be something from 1888 when the town was first young, even 1883 perhaps. So here's a picture of the block in the 50s, according to James. He sent me this picture. And there is the confectionery, and there's the corner, and there's an old 40-something Chevy, and there's the family house back there before it got moved. That building had to get moved too, because look how close that building is to the corner. The new brick drugstore wouldn't fit on that little sliver. That building got jacked up and hoisted down a lot, and put back down, and the new store built in that position. Doggone it, and it doesn't show up because it's a full screen image. You know, I had the hardest time, as worse than pulling teeth, getting a picture of the new store. You know, it's part of our lives for all of our lives, but nobody ever took a picture of it, it seems. I found a picture in one of my grandmother's treasures, which I've had since she passed on. It's the Golden Jubilee of Tower News edition, all yellowed. But looking through that, I found a picture of Marttila's new drugstore. And I made a scan of that, and I put it in here full screen after putting out a plea on the internet. Right, Christine? For someone to turn out me a picture, and nobody did. So I found that, and I put it in, and I come here, and it doesn't show up. Oh, there's a double oofta. So you remember what the store looked like. Remember it on yellowed paper here in your minds. And by hook or by crook, I had found a picture of it until all the backgrounds disappeared. No, so the new store opens April 10th, 1958. Coincidentally, the same day Anne Marttila Wierma was born. So James's sister, Walt and Verena's daughter, Anne, born the day the store opened. And you know what a conundrum that must have caused to a family with such a strong work ethic. You know, back then, of course, dads weren't allowed in to watch the delivery anyway, but you want to be close by. So did Walter stay and run the store? Did he have employees do it? That must have been something he had to wrestle with for a while. And there, of course, then is my cousin Anne, looking not too concerned about the whole deal a few years later. Of course, Anne eventually marries Charlie Wierma. I would have thought maybe Anne and Charlie would have been here today, but oh well. You can't have it all, I guess. And doggone it, the next image has got some troubles too. I had a picture of the Marttila drug block in 1959, taken from down here by Desnoy's up the block. And you guys remember how busy that block used to be. Now it's the Carlson's two buildings and the old Arrowhead garage, and everything else has gone in between pretty much except for that phone junction building. Remember the West End Market, all those fun places like that? I had a beautiful color picture, or at least a semi-beautiful color picture. Back to my grandfather who liked photography. Had a box camera, had a Polaroid camera. Once in his life, it seems he splurged on slide film, and he took slides of town here. He took a nice color picture of what Arrowhead Dodge looked like in 1959, what Desnoy's garage looked like in 1959, what his Christmas tree looked like in 1959. And I'm told by my Aunt Jill, he took pride in his Christmas trees. He would go out in the forest and find the most perfect tree, not just any old one. And he would cut it and he would bring it home, first set it up in the basement to get all the bugs out of it, literally. And if there was something unbalanced about it, he was not above cutting off a branch, drilling a hole, and sticking it in where it belonged. So no wonder he took a color slide picture of that tree. But anyway, he had a nice picture of that block, including Marttila Drug. and it's not showing up. And I say it's a semi-nice picture because over time, the side with Marttila drug on it had faded. You know, colors don't last forever. That part had faded, but the West End Market, it looked like you could walk into the store right now. It's so crystal clear and colorful. Brings back fond memories. If I'm not mistaken, when my parents got married, they spent at least one summer in an apartment above that building. I'm too young, or I was too young then to remember. What's that old George Harrison line? I was too young when I was born. Yeah, I don't remember it, but I'm told. All right. Dr. James Marttila, inspired by his father, he becomes a pharmacist too. Here's a picture of Jim in Finland, in Marttila County, I believe. There's a county in Finland named Marttila. That's where the family name comes from. This was a number of years ago. James, of course, when he earned his own pharmacy degree from the University of Minnesota around 1971, what a year that was for Jim. On one hand, he's proud that he's got his new degree and he's following his father's footsteps, but sad because Rena passed away that year. His mother passed on. So that's why I don't remember much about her. I must have been about 7 when that happened. And again, falling back on our family not being overly touchy-feely, it's not like we had frequent family reunions. We heard about everybody, but we never actually saw everybody that often. That's the way that rolled. But Jim, he's got his pharmacy degree. He's pitching in and helping his father out for a while. And in his memoirs, he talks about how even in 1971, a lot of customers for Marttila's could only speak Finnish still, or some could only speak Italian, and you had to really scratch your head and try to figure out what they wanted and get it to them. And as Jim points out, as a pharmacist, he was the closest thing to a doctor in town. So a lot of tourists with minor maladies would have him actually treat them, you know, skin rashes, sunburn, things like that, prescribe and treat. And he was also the closest thing to a veterinarian. He says he took care of a fair number of animals brought in with ailments too. So, you know, what's that English series about the country veterinarian, all things great and small? Looks like we had to do that here in Tower-Soudan as well. And of course, we all know what a wonderful time it was to go to Marttila's and buy a comic book or get a magazine or get a malted milk made at the counter there. Again, if it wasn't Walter Martha doing it for you, it was some of their great employees. So by the early 90s, Walt and Martha retire finally. They're in their 80s. Again, they're finally becoming the old people, just like the nursing home residents they volunteered for and helped out so often. This is a picture of Walt from an article that ran in the Star Tribune that James sent me. And you guys, of course, remember, was it the 70s or the 80s when the Duluth News Tribune did a big article on the Marttila drugstore as well? And that was a sweet thing to find, if you can find it, because of course I couldn't find it. So Walt and Martha finally retired to their beautiful apartment on top of the drugstore. And you know, we used to love going there to visit. My wife Lori and I, we'd bring my son Joe. He's like 6'2" now, but he wasn't always that tall. And when he was little, he liked to go work out on Walt's exercise equipment because Walt was told to exercise for his heart. And my son liked the treadmill too. So yeah, Walt, he was always a go-getter, always on the move, even when he couldn't move so well. So we used to enjoy visiting Walt and Martha up there in their apartment, a big apartment too. You know, you got to have room for 2 kids, a mother-in-law as well. So is that where you live now, Vicki? Are you guys up there? Okay. Yeah, that's a pretty good place. It's a big apartment, nice and roomy, and a great view out the front window of everybody's doings at the liquor store. And I don't think it was above Walt and Martha to watch who was coming in and out of that place either. Which reminds me of a story of Pastor Larner. Anybody here remember Pastor Frederick Larner? Yeah. I was a school patrol boy in Ely. My duty post was on Sheridan Street near one of the liquor stores, and I saw Pastor Larner go in there one day. He was just going to buy communion wine, of course, but he told me he had to do it in Ely because if he tried it around here, people would start to spread rumors. And that is the nature of Tower-Soudan as well. So Walter and Martha have retired, but they're still around. And of course, this is where Jean Ann enters the picture. I used her maiden name, Jean Ann Silverness here. But you're married to a Larson fella, right? Yeah, don't you know? When I come up here, I get to speak in the natural inflection rather than trying to put on a broadcaster air. Yeah, so we can do a lot of that stuff. So Jean Ann takes over the store, and at least we have, it doesn't show up too perfectly in this picture. It looks better on my screen. This is a picture I took. I took it on the night of February 1st, 1996. We know what happened at Kathy Huppa's place on the morning of February 2nd, 1996, don't we? State record cold temperature set at 60 degrees below zero. The night of February 1st, I was sent up here to do a story on how Tower-Soudan people were dealing with that cold snap in anticipation of the record being broken the next morning. So of course I got to take a picture of Aunt Martha and Uncle Walt's place, because what is Tower-Soudan known for? The fire hall, that old steam fire engine that I remember from being a child, Marttila drug, and the McKinley Memorial. You know, I've heard that Tower was the first place to put up a tribute to slain President McKinley back around 1900 or so. So there's Tower again, on the cutting edge. And of course, Jean Ann runs the store for a number of years, but even she becomes less than a spring chicken once in a while. No offense, Jean Ann. And moves on and opens her card store. And that's where Vicky, Charlie, and Willard take over the building in 2014. And even though the business has changed, they're still wonderful, welcoming people. You know, you go in there and buy some cool antiques, and they'll talk you up, and they're so friendly. And they, like Vicky mentioned, they love hearing the stories of when it was the drugstore, and they've compiled all of that into their memory banks, and they have some mementos of the history of the building, and they'll talk to you about it all day long, just like I have as well, which means I think we're finally starting to wrap this thing up. Thank you for putting up with me here. We only have a couple more slides to go. Let's start talking about the Marttila family. Of course, we know that constant family, two of the children passed on. Twin sisters Martha and Ellen eventually become roommates at the nursing home in Virginia. Here they are, their 93rd birthday at one of the Saint nursing homes in Virginia there. They were their roommates. They grew up together. They got to finish their lives together. It was fun to visit them. Their cousin Esther Norha was in there as well, in case you knew her. She was married to Art Norha. She was probably a Harma. I can't remember now. I think she was, or a Wiljama. Wasn't she Axel Wiljama's sister? So anyway, the three cousins were in the same house together, in the same place together. I would go there to visit, and we would wheel all three of them into the same meeting room where they could talk to each other and reminisce as best as you can when you're in your 90s, because it was mostly, it's good to see you. What? I said, good to see you. Okay, what? But they had big smiles as, you know, they touched hands and got to end their lives together. So time marches on. Here's another one of those images that didn't stick, but it was one of those pictures from that series in 1944 where it showed the kids and Walter in his uniform. So time marches on. Betty Colness passes on in 1994. Uncle Walt passed away way too early, I think, in 2002. Martha made it to 2006 at the age of 93. And my grandmother, who thought she was going to die early, pardon me for breaking up, lived to be 97. Still seems like yesterday. And that pretty much wraps up this presentation. I'll turn back on the lights. Jean Ann will put out her mementos that she's saved from her ownership of the empire and share stories with each other. So thank you, everybody, for sitting down for this spiel. Thank you so much. And again, I'm told this will be on Ely Community Access TV eventually, and the Historical Society here's website, so you'll be able to see it again. And I'm talking with Dick Pila that we should do something on the Pila Empire someday, because Sonny had his hand in so many things. In fact, you know what my inheritance was when my grandfather passed on in 2005? A whole bunch of Pila memorabilia. I've got Pila Arrowhead Garage thermometers in every room. And you know, you watch the phone numbers change from like phone 400 to the later days 753, whatever the number was. And so, indeed, that's my claim to fame. That was my inheritance, and I do treasure those things. They are worth $1 million to me. On that note, thanks a lot.